I was 7 years old when I started to figure out I was gay. There were a few little things to start with, but the big one came from watching Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. My brother talked about how much he fancied Hermione Granger, and I was sat there confused as to why I didn't, and even more confused as to why I fancied Cedric Diggory. 10 years later, at 17, I was officially diagnosed with an eating disorder. Growing up, I was always just called a fussy eater. I grew up in a big family, and I was the second youngest out of 10 siblings, so it was quite easy to keep things hidden or for small things to be overlooked, and my family around me just viewed it as me being fussy with food. At 17, I knew that problem was still ongoing, but getting the diagnosis was a step in the right direction. It took me 3 years to be able to reach out and ask for help. There were times in those 3 years where I didn't think I needed help. I pushed people away who cared. I felt alone. But in time, I started to figure out that I wasn't alone, and I'm still not. I saw a study that found that more than half of young people between the ages of 13 and 24 who identify as LGBT+ have been diagnosed with an eating disorder, and that's why I wanted to make this documentary. I'm currently at the docks in Preston to visit Shelley Perry, who is the Clinical Director for Breathe Therapies and the CEO of Seed Lancashire. So what is an eating disorder?
An eating disorder is a complex mental illness. It really isn't just about food. It's really not just about body image. It's not somebody being just vain. It really is a very complex mental illness, and there are a range of different eating disorders.
So what are the common types of eating disorders and how common are they?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because mostly in the media people have heard of anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa, and that's what tends to be on TV programmes and soaps, etc. But actually anorexia nervosa represents only 10% of those people with an eating disorder, and it's 40% of bulimia nervosa, and the rest, so that other 50%, are such as binge eating disorder, compulsive eating disorder, OSFED and pica, and some of the more rare eating disorders. Research suggests that there's 1.25 million people in the UK suffering with an eating disorder at any one time, and those are just the people that are being diagnosed. So there's a lot more people that we know have got eating disorders but are not coming forward for help, and there's actually 25% of those now that we know are male.
And what are the general causes of an eating disorder, and what age are they common at?
There is no one cause for an eating disorder. There's lots of different causes. Again, it's very, very complex, but there are things that can preempt or predispose somebody to have an eating disorder. So some people attribute eating disorders to media and fashion, and there's certainly a lot of pressure around for young people these days in the media. So much is about looks, the way that you look, and is it acceptable? So young people, particularly in schools, are often in groups now, and you need to be in sometimes the popular group. And this again is a really common story that we hear. And young people needing to feel accepted and that they're good enough can lead somebody to having an eating disorder. But there's also a lot of really unhelpful social media stuff out there, such as fad diets and the importance of extreme exercise and the importance of abs and having a certain body type, and can certainly play a part into people developing an eating disorder.
When I was 18 years old, my mum was finally out of hospital, and she recognised the signs in me immediately. My mum had an experience of an eating disorder when she was a teenager, so she knew what the signs were and she knew how to talk to me. So out on a walk, she just mentioned to me that she felt like something was going on with my eating. She thought that I might have been sick, and she just said, I'm here for you. Would you like to go to the doctors? And it was the first time ever that someone had said to me, hey, it's okay, I'm here for you. There's help out there. So I went to the local doctors, and unfortunately for me, the doctor said, well, you're a guy, guys don't really have eating disorders. I think you're just stressed and you've got bad indigestion. So I was given some tablets for indigestion and sent on my way, which for me at the time, as you can imagine, it was horrible. I built up so much confidence to talk to somebody about this and to ask for help. At that time, I still quite liked my eating disorder. I wanted it, so asking for help was quite terrifying. When I got rejected, it just destroyed me. I, at that moment, said, right, no one's ever going to help you. You can't reach out to anybody. You're on your own here. So you need to destroy all friendships, destroy all relationships. You need to completely shut down and just build barriers around yourself so nobody can ever get close to you or know what you're going through. So it sent me off on a very dangerous spiral after that.
It's shocking to hear, but it also does link into the common myths around eating disorders. What would you say are the most common, and what are the big stigmas around eating disorders?
There's so much stigma attached to eating disorders. And I find it's one of the reasons why I speak out, because I want to challenge that stigma and make eating disorders part of a normal conversation, because everybody out there has had some form of disordered eating. And you can see how easy it is to fit into that pattern and for it to go a bit further, which happened with me. I see a lot of stigmas, especially when I was younger. The big stigma was that it was a female. Eating disorders were predominantly female, and that was mostly through the representation in TV and the media and in film. And nobody really spoke about it there back then. And even now, when you see quite a lot of the services out there, it's quite often female imagery. And I think the biggest stigma that I wish would change around eating disorders, especially around bulimia, is that it's all about losing weight and becoming thin. I had bulimia like intensely for 5 years. I lived with it for 10 years in total, and I never became thin. My weight fluctuated every single month because it's just the nature of the disease. And I think that it's really important to show that there's a full representation of people with bulimia and to be reflective of the fact that we all have different body types, and you're not just going to get, there's never going to be one like way to lose weight. And yeah, I wish that would change. It was through therapy that I learned how intertwined my sexuality and bulimia was. When I was younger, I felt like I developed bulimia to get control over a very chaotic life. And I later learned that it was actually my sexuality that was the biggest cause of my bulimia. At the time when I was coming to terms with being gay and my parents were diagnosed with cancer, my mind switched into this mode of punishment where I just felt like, no, you're gay. Everyone's telling you that it's wrong. So therefore, I should be the one that's punished and I should be the one that's ill. And I think that's the mindset that took over when I was 16, and it lasted right up until I was 25 when I finally got help for my bulimia. And it was actually through the help and through coming to terms with my sexuality and loving my sexuality and therefore loving myself that I was finally able to deal with all those mental traumas that set me up for bulimia. So I think, yeah, from my personal experience, it's connected. And when you look at the research that is available, there does show a big link between sexuality and eating disorders. Unfortunately, there isn't much research done into this in the UK. There's a lot of research in the US about this, and it does show that there's more chance of people in the LGBTQ plus community to be affected by an eating disorder, because they have a higher chance of being affected by mental health and stresses around mental health. And it's a proven fact. It's seen in adults, it's seen in teens. Teens up and as young as 12 have a higher chance of developing disordered eating than cisgender or straight teens. And it's just, yeah, there's research out there that has been done that shows there's a high link here, and there is a much more of a chance of somebody developing disordered eating based on your sexuality.
I think with the LGBT plus community itself, its obsession with body image is one thing I definitely struggled with. On dating apps, you get all sorts of language thrown at you about your body size, and you're not even the size that they call you, and they'll mock you for it. I think the community needs to look at the attitudes towards body image and pride festivals and make them a bit more inclusive, because even on television we see, like on Drag Race, the plus size queens are always the comedy queens. Why can't they be the glamour queens? I think we really need to change our attitudes.
Yeah, I agree. The research that's come out of the US around eating disorders and the prevalence in LGBT plus adults and adolescents links directly to body image and the dissatisfaction in body image, but also the body image ideals that are put out through the media, in particular social media, through like dating apps. There's this big pressure to have a certain body type. And I think, and that link has been proven through research throughout all eating disorders, that media stereotype of a body is going to have a real impact on someone's mental health and the way they see their own body. And that is one of the biggest links to eating disorders.
Is recovery possible with an eating disorder?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I feel like that's a really important point that I want to get out there. Recovery is possible for an eating disorder. There's a lot of stigma around there that recovery isn't possible when you've got an eating disorder, and often that's based on the genetic statistics that and information around that eating disorders have a genetic component, which is absolutely true. But that doesn't mean to say that somebody can't get well from an eating disorder. So Beat explained that somebody might be in recovery from an average of 5 to 8 years, but we've seen people recover much quicker than that when we can get people early, and in particular when it's their first onset. So if we can access an individual who has had an eating disorder between 3 and 6 months, we can usually turn that around within 12 months. If there's no underlying major trauma as well that needs addressing. So that is back to that early intervention is key.
I'm about to meet with Dr. Rosanna Allen-Khan, who is the Member of Parliament for Tooting and the Shadow Minister for Mental Health. Rosanna has been a dedicated ally to the LGBT community and has been vocal in her support to helping those with eating disorders. Rosanna continues to challenge the government and vocalise their support on her platforms, including the Dump the Scales campaign, which challenges the government to change the eating disorder guidelines and help people before it's too late.
I think it's really important for everyone to understand that when it comes to people struggling with eating, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and actually it's about understanding that so much of the issue with eating disorder is trauma that people have experienced in their life that has led them to have an eating disorder, and that actually we need to have a trauma-based approach to how we tackle this, and understand that just because somebody doesn't weigh a certain amount or doesn't have a certain body mass index, BMI, it doesn't mean they aren't really struggling with their eating habits. And it doesn't mean that things can't also spiral out of control. And we know, I know this as a doctor, that when you tackle things early, you have a much better outcome. And currently, for people with eating disorders, it's a real postcode lottery. The sort of help you can access truly depends on where you live. We also know that as a result of the pandemic, eating disorders are hugely on the rise as young people have suffered through huge emotional trauma.
Definitely, and the cuts to the mental health services, we've seen them over the past 10 years. There's a dire situation and no one's speaking about it really, no one's addressing it. If you don't look anorexic, which is a term I absolutely hate, you could be turned away. And what do you think we could do to start these conversations and bring attention to this situation that is in a dire situation?
I think we have to understand that it starts from the beginning when people who are having the training, like doctors, actually are taught what to look for, taught about eating disorders in a meaningful way. We know that some medical students really are only getting 2 hours of training in their whole career. This isn't good enough, because without truly understanding the drivers behind eating disorders, without truly understanding that it isn't a one-size-fits-all model, that it is deeply, deeply complex. The people who are supposed to be providing the help are never going to be able to provide the adequate help. And we know that the system has been hugely overstretched. Liam, I don't think mental health should be a political football, but unfortunately it is. We know that over the last 10 years, there hasn't been the investment in mental health. We know that it's our young people that have suffered the most as a result. And, particularly when we look at as well, I think it's important to look at the intersectionality between things like, coming from our LGBTQ plus family or being BAME, like one of our BAME community, and that can have a significant impact on your mental health as well as eating disorders. And then, of course, you have people who are LGBTQ plus with an eating disorder, or who are Black or Asian with an eating disorder. And we need people who understand the intersectionality of all of these things so that we can adequately tackle it. And I think in just sort of having arbitrary measures like a BMI, you risk seeing someone and just putting a sticking plaster on something that doesn't really treat the wound that's underneath. I think that's really, really important to acknowledge. And, you know, I'm actually really proud of you, Liam, for doing this and using your opportunity to make a documentary on this subject, because it's only through people talking about it more that we can truly raise awareness of it.
So what was your character's involvement with the anorexia storyline?
It was very much heavily involved, my character, because I was the mum and obviously a nurse, as I've said. And it was Hannah, my daughter, who had anorexia, and they did it really well, actually, very sensitively done, because some storylines, I think, happen too quick, and before you know it, you think, what's happened? Whereas that particular storyline took months to start and sort of worm its way in, if you like, and then it became, she got a best friend called Mel who was anorexic, and they sort of had this pact, and it continued for nearly about 12 months, to be honest. So it was it had a huge impact on the show, and certainly a huge impact on me and the character and our family as a whole. It was incredible to film.
So what kind of research did you do for the story, and did you speak to any charities beforehand?
Well, as a show, they did an immense amount of research because they wanted it to be absolutely to the letter spot on, because they knew that they'd got a duty of care to the audience to make sure that they dealt with it as sensitively and as absolutely to the letter what it should be like. And I think we all did that. I did on my own research as well, and because, as I said, the character was a nurse, I was sent to go to training, and I did a week of training of St John's Ambulance in Manchester doing CPR, because there was one particular scene where Mel, Hannah's best friend, actually died, and I'm giving a CPR. It was horrific. It was so harrowing, that scene. And I remember we stopped filming, and I was, as me, Suzanne, and the character, I just couldn't stop crying.
Please, let's go. Let go. Go. We're gonna go.
It was so sad. I've got goosebumps thinking about it now. It was really, really intense.
How important was the storyline for you?
It was really important because it gave me, as an actress, something to really get my teeth into. It was very, very difficult. It was so difficult because Suzanne had to try and hold it together. But I'll never forget the scene where we as a family thought everything was all right, that she was getting better. But Suzanne had her suspicions, and she'd go up and she'd give her food and she'd do all of these things. And Hannah would pretend that she'd been eating it. And Suzanne just had this idea that there was something not right. And she found all this food on the floorboards with Sarah, Louis Batley, and I remember when I was picking up the floorboards and I was pulling out this food, and I was in tears, and it was so hard.
Is that all food?
But it was just, I thought it was done so well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the storylines for me, the scenes that just vivid in my head when
Really?
I saw that, yeah. It's like, I relate to that one.
Right.
As I used to flush food down the toilet, not under the floorboards, but that was very relatable at the time to see that. At the time, what was the reaction?
Because the writing was so good, it really made a massive difference, certainly to me, but I know to the audience.
Yeah, well, for me personally, it was one of the first times I'd seen something that was so relatable and something like me on television, and I was so grateful, and I'm so thankful that you're here today with me in my documentary as well, and you've been a big part of my life growing up, and I'm glad that you've been here for me.
Well, I've absolutely loved being here for you, and I hope we'll always be here for you, because I think, sometimes as actors and as teachers, we don't realise how impactful media is, and certainly storylines. So if it's not done right, it can have the worst negative effects on people, but if it's done well, it can have such a good impact like it has with you.
Research from Beat again suggests that around 46% of anorexia patients fully recover, and 33% improve and 20% remain chronically ill. Similar research is into bulimia, suggests that 45% make a full recovery, and 27% improve considerably, and 23% suffer chronically, unfortunately.
So if we have someone that is struggling watching this, or someone that's watching this might know someone that's struggling, what is the best way to approach this situation and to help?
Asking for help is really important. Don't wait. I think that was probably the most important message that I'd want to convey to people, that this is not something that is just going to go away on its own. It's not something that you can just deal with on your own. Please do speak to a friend, somebody that you really trust, somebody that you can confide in. That's the first step. You're going to need a bit of a buddy along this journey, so think about who that might be, who you could share with. Also, get yourself along to a support group if you possibly can, and the GP as well, your own GP. Go and talk to your GP, tell your GP what's going on, and get the right help for you. Perhaps even have a look around on the internet and have a look at what services are there around your locality, because there are services out there, and the Beat website's great. It's a fantastic resource for identifying different services, but also for advice and for information. And there's also some helplines and things on there as well.
For years, I felt a huge amount of shame because I was gay, even in a family that was as loving and as open as my own. On top of that, I felt shame because of my eating disorder. In 2016, I got help for the first time and I recovered. But in 2018, while stuck in a relationship that was toxic for a number of reasons, I turned to the only thing I could control, and I fell back into my eating disorder on a much worse scale. Thankfully, identifying the signs and causes helped me overcome my second battle, and I've been in recovery for 2 years now. During that time, there was a book that brought me a lot of comfort. When I had days where I struggled a lot, this book was something I could turn to and really escape from my mind and thoughts. It was something in that period of time that brought me joy. And I think having something like that really helped me to begin to want to get help. Throughout my recovery, I had my family and friends around me who loved and cared and really helped me to get better. Asking for help saved my life, and that's the message I want to end on. There's no shame in asking somebody for that help, and it can really make a difference.